Excuse-moi, je peux faire ça après.
Sébastien?
Wait.
I think you can start. You're live.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Good. Thanks. So after this break, I'll give you sort of summary of different policy measures that have been discussed these 2 days, especially today, on recommendations for the sustainable EU retail investment policy. We have a maximum 30-minute session, and then Nicolas from Tool Investing Initiative will close this 2 days from the high-level expert forum for sustainable finance in the framework of the EEI project. So going to the different recommendations, and for that that session, I will especially focus on the briefing done together by different organizations, namely Share Action, Tool Investing Initiative, Better Finance, BEUC, Transport and Environment, and the WWF, which are have gone together to produce a briefing recommendations for EU policymakers on 10 different points for fully sustainable retail investment policy. And it is structured in 2 parts. First part is on the sales and distribution process with financial advisors, etc. A second part that is more on the product features and on the origination of financial products. And I will go through these 2 parts successively. Starting with the first one on distributors, so sales and distribution process. There are 5 recommendations that we raised that have been discussed today. The first one is to monitor whether financial advisors properly ask retail clients about their sustainability preferences. As you may know, and it was presented this morning, there are new amendments in delegated acts on both MiFID II and IDD, requiring financial advisors as from August next year to ask retail clients their sustainability preferences. And however, there are still concerns whether this will be enough, because these 2 delegated acts are not very granular, they're not very detailed. So the recommendation here is to make sure that ESMA will complement this new delegated acts by producing a template questionnaire to provide more granular guidance to financial advisors in order to improve compliance with the new delegated acts and to reduce risks of liabilities. And there's another element which we think is important. These are new requirements in the new delegated act. It's still unsure how they will be implemented by financial advisors in the market. So we feel it's important that ESMA reviews how the national competent authorities, the NCAs, monitor this and checks if the supervision is sufficient to ensure the proper implementation of these new obligations for financial advisors, or whether more will be necessary. And notably, ESMA should carry out mystery shopping exercises, mystery shopping visits to check, to assess, to monitor if financial advisors implement the new requirements properly and meaningfully. A second recommendation is to require minimum sustainability competencies of financial advisors. Positively, this was already committed by the Commission in the recently published new Sustainable Finance Strategy last July. What this means, in our view, is a requirement that financial advisors have a minimum level of sustainability expertise that can be proven by certificates. It builds on a major concern evidenced by research published by Aviva Investors last year, showing that 45% of financial advisors admitted to have no ESG training at all. So it makes it very difficult, of course, for financial advisors to advise on sustainability issues if they have zero training on that issue, while everybody agrees this issue is not very easy and relatively complex and sophisticated. So that's something critically important, and there are already precedents in different member states. For example, the French IMF is already integrating this sustainability expertise in the certificates for financial advisors. So the Commission can clearly build on these precedents to move forward and ensure there's a minimum level playing field. A third issue is to align the interests of financial advisors with those of their retail clients. And this links to a hot issue, which is about the inducements. The payment of inducements to financial advisors can lead to biased financial advice. This has played a key role in many recent mis-selling scandals, as shown by studies from Better Finance or from BEOC that were mentioned this morning. And there are conflicts of interest in the distribution channels of retail investment products. These conflicts of interest should be eliminated. And one major way forward for this is banning the receipt and retaining of monetary or non-monetary remuneration of financial advisors, which is basically banning inducements. Importantly, there are also big precedents in that space, both in the UK and in the Netherlands, that both banned inducements in 2012 and 2014, so that already several years ago. And since then, studies on the impact in these Dutch and British markets showed that there was no advice gap, which was one of the risks raised, but this risk is not evidenced. And also that the reaction, financial advisors were rather selling simpler products to retail clients, which is certainly a good news because retail clients don't have expertise to really assess and understand complex and sophisticated products, especially exotic products. The fourth element is to require that sustainably denominated funds are systematically proposed as a default retail option, which is subject to other requirements to make sure, of course, that these sustainable funds are not greenwashed. This is something that WWF itself deems quite important, and it builds on the following evidence. There's overwhelming assessments from at least 12 different studies over the last 2-3 years that 2/3 at least of retail investors are willing to invest their money in a sustainable way when they are asked the question. And that means a big majority. And in such a context, if there's a big majority in retail investors in favor of this, WWF believes that this should become the new normal. This should become the default option, precisely because there is this big majority. And that means reversing the current opt-in system, where retail investors have to express explicitly their interest to invest sustainably so that they are proposed in principle sustainable products. We change the system and move to an opt-out system where by default retail investors are proposed sustainable options. And of course they can opt out if they wish and they say, well, I don't care about sustainability issues. We think that's something really important. Investing sustainably must become the easiest choice, the new normal, because this is what the majority of retail investors are asking for and want. The fifth and last issue in this first cluster is ensuring that fintech safely empowers retail investors to identify financial products that best match their sustainability preferences. If I can do a comparison, there's Airbnb when you want to rent a house or a flat for a weekend or for your holidays. They are able to set up a tool, a tech device on an app or on a website where you can select buildings or houses to rent with more than 50 criteria. I checked recently. So it's extremely granular and sophisticated. And the question is whether this can be reproduced for financial products, for which consumers could could specify their own sustainability preferences and then be offered different options that match their own demand more or less well, depending on what is available in the market. For example, willing to invest in funds ensuring there is no child labor, or there is decent work, or there is no nuclear, or no fossil fuels, or no GMOs, or exclusion of weapons industry, etc., etc. And it should be ensured that these developments follow minimum requirements for transparency, for sustainability criteria, for matching algorithms, etc., to not create new risks for retail investors, of course, to make sure the different claims are evidenced. And there are examples as well there. There are also precedents. For example, 2-Degree Investing Initiative launched recently at EU level a new website called My Fair Money in different countries, assessing thousands of funds available in the EU retail market on climate criteria, for example. And there are other initiatives like Fair Finance in Belgium trying to do the same thing at the level of different retail funds, which is really relevant. And it's actually surprising that it is not more developed as of today in the financial industry that claims to be highly innovative and to innovate very fast. Moving now to the second cluster of issues that have been raised and discussed, the focus on financial market participants, and more precisely the product features and the origination of financial products. There are also 5 recommendations that have been raised and discussed, especially today. The first one is about disclosure. Disclose sustainability information for retail funds in a standardized, clear, accessible way for non-experts retail investors. That's something that was discussed a lot. This disclosure element, of course, is not sufficient and not enough, but is a key enabling condition to provide the information to the market. The technical way to do this properly is to integrate standardized critical sustainability information for each financial product in its key information document. The KID that exists in UCITS, in PRIPS, in PEP, in many different EU product level regulations, critical ones, making sure this would be standardized across the board. That means for different types of financial products, it should be, as much as technically relevant, of course, it should be the same type of standardized information so that it makes it easier for retail investors to access the information first, and also to understand and to compare the information. And for example, the color graded system has been raised by different participants to do this properly, mirroring, for example, the EU energy efficiency label that has been a huge success in the last 20 years, a bit more, I think, which is used in a mandatory way for white appliances, cars, and buildings in the EU market, and having 7 grades from green to dark green to dark red, with different grades in between. It may be possible to do this in an easier way. I mean, there are different options that must be discussed to make sure retail investors will have such information, but available in an easy and standardized way is critical. Next issue is to ensure minimum standards for sustainability denominated funds. Positively, once again here, the Commission has taken a commitment in its new sustainable finance strategy in July to work on this and to make proposals by next year, by the end of next year. This is an important issue. It links to the SFDR file, in which investors are required to disclose whether their funds qualify as notably as Article 8 fund or Article 9 funds in the SFDR framework. Article 8 being light green, Article 9 being, conceived or understood as light green and dark green. The bulk of funds now apparently are, in the majority of new funds now, or new money going to funds in the EU market in the last few months is going to Article 8 or 9 funds. So there's a big question whether this will become a new normal to invest in a sustainable way. That links, by the way, to our previous point that sustainable investment should become the default option. for any retail investor. But there's also a big question of greenwashing here, of course. And greenwashing, as I mentioned this morning, raises huge problems in different ways. First, it can be useless or counterproductive even for EU environmental and sustainability goals. It slows down the transition to fully sustainable economy. That's the first problem. The second problem is that it is misleading retail investors, consumers who are willing to invest sustainably and who are believing that putting their money in this or that fund with this or that criteria will have a positive impact in the real economy in terms of different sustainability issues. And there's a third issue, third problem with greenwashing, which is that it undermines the trust and the credibility of the sustainable and the green finance market. It creates mistrust, which is quite problematic. So this must be absolutely avoided. And this minimum standards, of course, would be a key way to make sure the greenwashed funds are excluded from Article 8, Article 9 funds in SFDR and cannot be marketed as green or sustainable or ESG or etc. The discussion has started about what criteria should be put in place, what minimum standards should put in place for ensuring this. And the discussion is ongoing. If we take the analogy with the eco-label, there are different criteria that are required in the eco-label. I mean, the current draft, it is still ongoing. It's not finalized yet. Different criteria in the eco-label to ensure a fund could be labeled as, with the eco-label, including first a minimum exposure to sustainable activities. Second, exclusion criteria, do no harm criteria, be it on social or environmental issues. Third, engagement by the investors with the investee companies. Fourth, different requirements to enhance investor impact, making sure the investment in a green fund is not having impact by definition. The fund itself has impact if the investor is engaging, for example, with companies or is having different approaches, making sure there's an additional impact by the investor, by the portfolio, by the fund itself. And fifth, specific requirements on disclosure and information to retail investors or to the market. So these different criteria could be discussed, could become a minimum standard for denominated funds. And this discussion is also ongoing in different geographies. For example, BaFin in Germany did a consultation on this exact same issue in summer with different recommendations. The next issue is to ensure retail investor engagement. The analysis, notably by Better Finance, is that there are still obstacles impeding this investor engagement for retail investors, especially at cross-border when a French retail investor is buying Danish or a German product. There are still obstacles for this, and they should be removed to facilitate this investor engagement. It's not only for institutional investors. The next issue is to adequately finalize the EU eco-label for financial products. The discussion on this file started already several years ago, and it's moving forward very, very slowly, which is a worry for many different stakeholders, including WWF, that contributed to the development of this. And we think it's important to finalize this as soon as possible to make it available for the market. But there are, in our view, unnecessary delays in this file, which are problematic because it's slowing down this opportunity. And the last issue, last but not least, is to require that sustainability impacts of sustainability denominated funds are evidenced. And that's a major issue, which is still largely in its infancy, unfortunately. There's already some analysis, there are already some frameworks to assess the impact of an investor or of a portfolio of a fund even. But this is still largely analysis, research, market. This is not yet in the EU framework. This is not yet part of EU policies and regulations. It's not yet required to evidence that a green fund claim is demonstrated, is assessed with different sources, different findings, etc. Giving a quote from Ben Caldecott, who is the founding director of the Oxford Sustainable Finance Program, he made clear already a couple of years ago, you can have lots of green in a portfolio and have little or even no impact. And he concluded, if a product is claiming explicitly or implicitly it will make a difference, then it should be clear how it will do it, and there should be an accountable, transparent way of measuring the claim contribution over time. This is exactly the problem. If there's marketing for such products that is saying explicitly or implicitly it will have a benefit on the real economy, it should say how, and it should evidence it. And that requires a couple of things, especially the need to build evidence on the environmental impact of different investment strategies and techniques, and to ensure that the regulatory and policy framework is designed to reflect the scientific evidence. And it needs to build a responsible marketing framework for the finance sector to make sure there are requirements to evidence the claim when the claims are made for green, for sustainable products. And also to build, one step further, to build an evidence measurement framework, ideally at the EU level, to assess these claims and evidence them in a science-based way. So with all these 10 recommendations, we feel it might not be sufficient as a whole, but that would be already a huge step forward to ensure a strongly sustainable retail investment policy. And we do hope that the EU policymakers, especially the Commission, will take these recommendations into account and make them become gradually part of the EU retail finance policy framework. Thank you very much.
Sébastien, I see that you have a question from Michelangelo, who is asking if you see fintech relevant to ensure measurement at physical asset level based on science-based standards.
Thanks. Ensure measurement at physical asset level. Why not? I mean, I'm not too sure what fintech can do, but I'm told fintech can do miracles if there is capacity and behind it. Measurement at physical asset level. I think that could be potentially done if there are strong links created between, for example, green funds, underlying companies, underlying operations, or assets building on asset level basis, for example. So that would be something feasible. It is data intensive in many cases. It may not be impossible. I give you an example. If it's not a fintech tool for the retail investment market at all, but that's a tool developed by 2Degree Investing Initiative within the research consortium with a Horizon 2020 funding called SEI, Sustainable Energy Investment Metrics, which has led to the development of a tool called the Pacta Tool, which is assessing the level of alignment of a given investment portfolio or of a given investment fund with climate scenarios, basically with the Paris Agreement, if it's a Paris-aligned scenario. And this is done by integrating in the system, on the one hand, the holdings in the given fund or portfolio, in terms of, for example, number of shares and bonds, and all the underlying companies. And on the second hand, a huge amount of data on these companies, their assets, their existing assets and planned assets, with lots of data points on each of these assets for high carbon sectors. It's a climate focus, so it's about high carbon sectors. And this enables the Pacta tool to provide the, let's say, the Paris alignment of different portfolios on key and high carbon sectors, namely the oil and gas sector, the power sector, the automotive sector, shipping, steel, cement sectors, especially. So key ones. It's not the entire market, but that already captures more than 2/3 of emissions in the EU market. So that's already quite significant. And this is feasible. This is feasible with an online free software. So we could imagine similar tools could be developed also for retail investors, maybe simpler one, to enable them to do some assessments, but not only doing assessments, also enabling retail investors to choose, to select the different sustainable funds that best match their own preferences, and also, in addition, empower retail investors to engage with the different underlying companies in the funds they put their money in. Are there other questions?
No, not for the moment. Please don't hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A part.
Thank you. I'll wait. I'll check the Q&A, and otherwise I will then pass the floor in a few minutes to Nicolas from Togo Investing Initiative, who will close this 2-day event. Thank you very much.